Hey, welcome, Faithful Politics listeners and viewers. If you're watching on our YouTube channel, I am your political host, Will Wright, and I'm joined always by my partner in crime, Pastor Josh Bertram, your faithful host. How's it going, Josh?
Doing well. Just figuring out what the next crime is going to be.
and this week we're joined by Pastor Greg Boyd. He's someone that I've been looking forward to speaking to for a while. You guys, if you've been listening to our previous episodes, I've heard me mention him and his books. But Greg Boyd, he's an internationally recognized theologian. He's a preacher, a teacher, that rhymes, apologist, and author. He's also been featured on the front page of the New York Times, the Charlie Rose Show, CNN, NPR, BBC. He received his PhD from Princeton Theological Seminary and his MDiv from Yale Divinity School. He's got his BA in philosophy from the University of Minnesota, and he was a professor of theology for 16 years at Bethel University, and is the co-founder of Woollen Hills Church in St. Paul, Minnesota. He's authored 22 books. I have no idea where you find the time to do that. And numerous academic articles, including his most recent book, Inspired Imperfection, as well as Cross Vision. So welcome, Greg. I really appreciate you being here.
Thanks for having me on. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah. And what's odd is, out of all the 22 books you've written, we're going to be focusing a lot, I don't know, maybe like 50% of the time, talking about a book that you wrote 16 years ago called Myth of a Christian Nation, among a host of other topics. So I guess for starters, are you still pastoring?
Yes.
Yep. Awesome. And you're in St. Paul, I believe, right?
Right. Or technically we're in Maplewood, but right on the border of St. Paul, and so it often gets referred to as St. Paul.
Awesome. Are you guys preparing for the Snowmageddon, or is that a little too south?
Minnesota, man, it's always Snowmageddon.
How cold is it up there right now?
It is 5 degrees.
There you go.
Oh my gosh.
It feels like 5 below with the wind chill.
Jeez, yeah.
The day was 16 below, so I'll take 5. If it's above 0, I'm good.
we're in Virginia, and the new governor has already declared a state of emergency for like the 1 inch of snow we're probably going to get. So.
That's what we're gonna do. Plows are out there ahead of time, and we got taken care of.
Yeah. So let's talk real quick about the book you wrote in 2007 called Myth of a Christian Nation. I'll let you tell the story, but from my understanding, you wrote it kind of as a response to the 2004 election. Is that kind of an accurate sort of summary?
To the elections, and the series was called "The Cross and the Sword," and I just had, was like many pastors at that time, and it's certainly true today. I was feeling enormous pressure from a congregation who listen to Christian radio and watch Christian television, whatever, and they hear these people they respect saying, "You got to tell your pastor to lead the flock in the right way to vote." And by and large, it was always the right wing. You got to vote the Republican. And so I talked it over with my board, and we just came to the conclusion that this was a good teaching moment. We had never been, we've always tried to keep the church separate from the politics of the world and things like that. So we never had a flag in the church, and those kind of things. And occasionally, and we never celebrated the 4th of July and things like that as a Christian holiday. And we occasionally get questions about it, but we'd never done it like a clear teaching on why we think holding this distinction is so important. And so I did a 6-week series on this, and we ended up having about 1,000 people leave, which was, I think, about a third or fourth of our congregation at the time. And that's what got us on the radar screen of some people and got in the New York Times and things of that sort. But I wouldn't do it any differently, I don't think our job as pastors is to get as large a crowd as possible. Our job as pastors is to be building disciples. And this was a really good turn in our discipleship process. Once we made that turn, I didn't realize how much I had been unwittingly walking on eggshells, just to try to, like, because I knew that there's this undercurrent. But once we made this turn, it felt so good because now we could just own our identity and really kind of land on what we're about as kingdom people. It was a clarifying moment as we got rid of all the stuff that we've been carrying without even knowing it.
That's so amazing. I really resonate with that. Of course, I'm a pastor, and I have a ragtag group of which Will is a part of. We're trying to do a house church movement and centralize the idea of making disciples and be decentralized in a lot of our leadership, to be honest. And we and it is difficult. I was thinking about 2004, and then 2000 and this last election of 2020, which we pastored through, and that was, I don't know if how that felt to you, if that was more divided than you've ever seen it, but it was just even in our small context, we had enormous diversity as to who people were voting for, who they wanted to vote for, what they thought about all the racial issues that were raging. And I guess my question for you is, or one question I have is, what do you think is the appropriate way for pastors to address issues, and religious leaders to address issues of social importance? Because things are political because they're important to people in part, and they're deeply held beliefs like abortion, same-sex marriage. Those are the two obviously big ones, but immigration, of course, the way the economics works in our economy and things like that, and taxes, and how do you think we should address these things, and enter that political sphere as pastors, or should we?
And you can't make a kingdom impact if you're isolated from the very people you're supposed to be impacting. But it's a matter, I think, of priorities. So one priority that we have is that our job as kingdom people isn't to have the right opinions about what government should do. Our job as kingdom people is to do it. And so instead of fighting over what government should do about the neighborhood school that's dilapidated and forsaken and all of that, we ask the question, what can we do to help that school? And how can we sacrifice of our time and our resources? And doing that, you make an impact. So this happened to us maybe, I guess it was 18 years ago or so, where there's a school by us, an inner city school that was just, it was on the verge of collapse. It was always scoring the lowest on things, and it had a playground that was dilapidated and dangerous. And so we could have, gotten a panel together and saying, okay, let's talk about what government should do. And we probably would have had 3 people saying, well, they need more money, and other people saying, no, what they need is this. It could have divided. And so we spend our time arguing about something that we're not called to do and not doing the thing that we are called to do. So instead of that, let's say, how can we bleed for these people? And I think the kingdom always begins with our first drop of blood, because the kingdom always reflects Calvary kind of love. And so how can we sacrifice? Opinions are a dime a dozen, and it doesn't cost you anything. They just make you feel righteous. But what are you doing? You see, that's what's. And so, John defines love as love is this, that Jesus Christ laid down his life for us. So also we should lay down our life for one another. What good does it do if you have plenty and your neighbor is in want and you don't share? And so it's about, what do you do with this? How do we live it out? So that's the first priority. And second thing, I think is absolutely essential, is that we remember that everything we do has got to be done in love. 1 Corinthians 16, 14, let everything you do be done in love, including discussing politics. And so our maxim at Woodland Hills is that God's more interested in how we discuss issues than he is on the outcome of the issues. Because as Paul says in 1 Corinthians 13, you can have all the gifts in the world, you can have all knowledge and have all faith, you can move mountains and have all the right political opinions, but if it's not done out of love for the purpose of furthering love, it's altogether worthless. So those two. So I think in the kingdom, we should be able to have discussions on this. But do it in love, and in doing it in love, we could model to the world something that the world does not have, and that at least America does not have, and that is the capacity to discuss difficult issues in love.
Wow, that's really powerful. I appreciate you saying that, reiterating it. I definitely got that out of your book. And one of the other themes that I got out of your book was this concept that you spoke about frequently, about this like power over, power under concept. So I was curious if maybe you can talk a little bit about that, and discuss if you think it's still relevant even today.
Oh, I think everything I said in that book is more relevant today than it was in 2004, because as acrimonious and nasty as things were in 2004, they're far, far worse today. I mean, we've actually got now a government where we have significant numbers of people on both sides who think the other side is out to destroy America. And the rhetoric is being amped up like never before. I mean, basic common decency is going by the wayside, referring to your colleagues on the outside of the aisle as the enemy. This is, I don't know how democracy works if you have that going on. So it's all, I think, more relevant than it was back then. All the more so because there's such significant portions of Christians, evangelical Christians in particular, who are now known more for their political alliance than they are for the Christ that's supposed to be representing. Our most fundamental job as God's people, and this is true throughout the Bible, it's also another thing that we've been worst at. But our job is to offer people something different than they have now. And it's to glorify the name of the Lord, his character, his reputation, to live in a way where we magnify his character. And his character is holy, which means it's separate, it's distinct, it's uncommon. It's not like the mundane things of this world. And that is what we're supposed to be known for, our outrageous love. Jesus says that. They'll know that you're my disciples by your love. And our most fundamental call is to live in love, Paul says in Ephesians 5, to imitate God, which means we live in love as Christ loved us and gave his life for us. We live in the self-sacrificial love. That's the kind of power that we're supposed to be relying on. And that's what highlights the character of God and sets us apart from the world. Tragically, if you were to go out and ask 1,000 non-Christians, pick out 1,000 non-Christians just to randomly interview them and ask, what's the first thing that comes to your mind when you think of Christians? I bet you wouldn't get one who would say, oh, they're just so loving and self-sacrificial and so humble. It doesn't matter who you are or what you believe. These folks just love on you, love on you, love you. That's not a reputation. Polls have been done on this. And the number one thing is they don't like gays. Number two thing is they think men are superior to women. And then from there goes all sorts of things. Oh, those are the people who vote this way and do this thing and the other. That should not be the case. We're to be known by our outrageous love, by our ability to replicate the Father's character, to love our enemies in ways that the world never does, to love like the rain falls and the sun shines. That's how Jesus puts it in Matthew 5. And that's how we show, he says, love your enemies and bless those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. This is supposed to be our trademark. And so we've got to turn that around. So the kind of power that we are to rely on is the power of self-sacrificial love. It's not that the power that the world's always clamored for is the power to get your way, power over others who disagree with you, power to defend your borders, power to further your self-interest and the interests of your nation. It's that Zeus power, Schwarzenegger power, might. And we've always ascribed that to the gods. So the gods are just bigger versions of us, and the reason we worship them is because they got the power. And they'll if we sacrifice our firstborn child, they'll lend us some of that so we can defeat our enemies. Well, that's not. In John 13, it says that Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things to him, that he came from the Father and was going back to the Father, knowing that, he put a towel around his waist and began to wash his disciples' feet. What do you do when you have all the power in the universe? Well, if you're serving the right God, you get on your knees and wash the feet of your friends and of your foes. And that's manifesting a different kind of power, because power over people, the power of laws, the power of guns, the power of just muscle, that can control people's behavior sometimes, but it does not do anything to change a heart. In fact, power over others usually hardens them in their stance against you. Whereas the power of self-sacrificial love and the power of forgiveness, the power of serving others, of ascribing unsurpassable worth to others, that has the chance of changing a heart. It can turn it's one power in the universe that can turn an enemy into a friend, and that's the kind of power that we're to be displaying to the world.
That's so powerful.
Set apart.
Absolutely. That's so powerful. You know, we were talking to someone yesterday. We actually did a podcast. It's going to be released here probably next week. But George Weigel, um, and he is the president of, or was a former president of Ethics and Public Policy Center. And he was one of the things he wrote in one of his articles was that Christianity brought this, like, changed the definition of heroism, where it was only it was only about might, like you said, in the Greek sense. And then it became something where a martyr was a hero, someone who would go and sacrifice themselves. And it kind of brought this redefinition, or at least added to the robustness of the definition, that there would be self-sacrificial love or acts of service. And as I'm hearing you talk, I'm thinking about how, man, all these people, they look at Christians, and I agree. Most people, I would ask, what do you think about Christians? They would say, are they loving? They would say no. And it's really heartbreaking. Yeah, they probably would laugh, or curse, or both, and it's like, I guess one thing that I'm thinking is, where do you, in your studies and as you've looked at this, where did we lose our way in America? Or maybe that's too broad of a question, but what do you think? What's been the influence? What's happened?
Well, I think we substantially lost our way around the early 4th century. Up to that point, Christians had been a persecuted minority, whose goal was to just replicate the love of Jesus Christ, and they were known as being different and as being self-sacrificial. When a plague would break out, everyone would run from the city, but the Christians would run to it to take care of the people that were afflicted. And that's one of the ways they bore witness, and that's how the church grew. But then in the 4th century, this Emperor Constantine allegedly had a vision that he was supposed to fight under the banner of Christ, and that's the first time Christ was associated with the war gods that we've always worshipped. And he won this battle, and so he starts, showing he legalizes Christianity, and then begins to throw his weight behind Christianity. And a lot of scholars argue that it's all politically motivated, and I think it was. But so Christians inherited this power and were invited to help run the state. And that's where the church and the state began to get fused. And so now, in Jesus' name, you fight national battles, and Jesus gets aligned with this country versus that country and all the rest. He becomes a typical pagan god. And so that's Christendom. And it was the church militant and triumphant, the church that's going to conquer the world the way that kingdoms have always conquered other kingdoms, but we're doing it under the banner of Christ. And that paradigm it's crumbling now rather quickly. It's altogether lost over in Europe. And I think the last holdout is America, where you have this Christians can take over because it's a sort of a Christian country. But I think it's a lion that's roaring with it because it's fatally wounded. And in its place is rising up. This is, some people kind of bemoan the fact that Christianity, has lost numbers, and we're no longer, filling our cathedrals like we once were over in Europe and whatever. But I think it's a necessary pruning. It is, we need to get rid of that paradigm, so we can begin to actually live out the kingdom. And so what's happening is, you guys are part of this movement. Folks are saying, okay, we know that wasn't the kingdom, at least to a large degree wasn't the kingdom. Yeah, God works through everything, so it wasn't altogether waste. But that basic paradigm of conquering the world, that we're supposed to conquer the world on our knees, not on by lording over people. And so what's happening are people who are just waking up to a Jesus-looking God who is about raising up a Jesus-looking people to transform the world in a Jesus kind of way. And it usually has small communities, because we understand how important community is to the kingdom. And so the kind of thing that you guys are doing, it doesn't look like traditional church at all, but it looks far more beautiful. It's not. It's messy, and you're dealing with people. So yeah, nothing's perfect, but the basic paradigm is one of service rather than getting our way. I think it's so weird. I think one of the greatest ironies and tragedies is that you have now Christians who, and we're supposed to have, died to our rights. We're supposed to be other oriented. We have Christians who fight for their right not to have to serve certain kinds of sinners. What's wrong with this picture? It's just, it's tragic.
It's tragic.
It's that's all good stuff, and I'm resisting the urge to keep saying like that'll preach after each
that
one
will
of your,
preach.
there's this line, or there's this point you make in your book, and it's about a paragraph, but it's really worth me reading, because if people are listening to this and they haven't read your book or don't plan on buying it or reading it, I just want to make sure that they at least hear this. So in your book, you write about this like all too common rally cry of Christians, this like oft repeated slogan of "We have to take America back for God." Um, and you're right. You say that the thinking is that America was founded as a Christian nation, but has simply veered off track. If we can just get the power of Caesar again, however we can take it back. If we can just get more Christians into office, pass more Christian laws, support more Christian policies, we can restore this nation to its quote, one nation under God status. And if we can just protect the sanctity of marriage, make it difficult, if not impossible, to live a gay lifestyle, and overturn Roe v. Wade, we'll be getting closer. And then the last, if we can just get prayer, Christian prayer, of course, back into our schools, along with the Ten Commandments and creationist teaching, we will be restoring our country's Christian heritage. And there's a couple more lines, but in essence, I was curious, like, if we were to play out this scenario, if folks that ascribe to that line of thinking got everything that they wanted, to include, having control over the liberal media, abolishing the ACLU, so on and so forth, what, then what? Like, what's the end state? Or is there this idea that we can manifest heaven on earth by virtue of legislating it? Like, well, what's your thought on that?
What you'd have is a Christian form of Islam, a Christian form of Sharia law, where everything is controlled, a totalitarian state. And I suppose the people who are for that ideology would be very, very happy, but it'd be just oppressive to everybody else. But yeah, that would be the end game. But the most important thing is that you could have that Sharia law. Everything is, ruled by Christians. You're not 1 inch closer to the kingdom. In my opinion, that's no more close to the kingdom than we are now, or than we were when we started. Because the thing is I would define Christ-like as cross-like. The cross is the summation of everything Jesus is about, and a people group are Christian to the degree that they replicate that self-sacrificial love towards all other people. And America's never been self-sacrificial to their enemies. They never loved our enemies. We never turned the other cheek. We never washed the feet of our enemies. Any nation that tried to do that maybe would be exterminated, which is why I agree with Jacques Ellul when he argues that to be a nation in this world is to be prepared to use violence. You can't survive in this world without violence. I think he's right about that, which means, in my book, that you can't have a Christian nation any more than you can have a Christian bicycle. We can't slap that. The label becomes meaningless if we, here, buy a Christian T-shirt and a Jesus cookie. Those aren't the kind of things that can be Christian and not Christian. States, the governments just are. I mean, some are better than others for sure, but they're not. Our job is to manifest a kingdom that's not of this world, to offer people not the Christian version of what they've already got. No, it's to offer something different, and to follow Jesus is different. You're going to swim upstream in all the kind of basic instincts that are enculturated into us growing up here in America: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those are great political values, but are they kingdom values? Am I supposed to be pursuing my own life and my own liberty and my own happiness? Isn't the goal to be seeking first the kingdom of God and His righteousness? So, yeah, that's really good. What a lot of people, and if I say one more thing, Josh,
Sure, go
a
ahead.
lot of folks, when they say, I want to take America back for God, um, they have some kind of a dream of, I think there's to a large degree, it's a time when white people ruled the nest, and manifest destiny was manifest that whites should rule, and it's getting back to some version of back when things were easy, when things were homogenous, when we didn't have all these foreigners, and everyone spoke English, and we understood everybody, and we didn't have to be suspicious of other, and that is far, far, far from the kingdom. It was never Christian.
I couldn't agree with you more, honestly. And you know, I was heavily influenced, growing up in kind of this idea. I didn't know what it was called, but Christian nationalism, which is, and again, it's hard because I felt like being patriotic was part of what a good Christian did, and basically, and that this was a Christian nation. That kind of, I mean, we never got into issues about religious freedom. It was kind of this response to like the fear of losing everything that we've had. And I guess my question, like, so I have a friend, James, and we talk a lot, and he's another guy who comes to the church, and he talks to me about this, and he doesn't believe in this. He's not an ascriber to this, but he talks about this thing called the Seven Mountain Mandate, where we have to go and we conquer these different Christianity and politics and culture and education and the universities and stuff like that. Um, and I guess so we have a system that grew out of a culture, a worldview largely influenced by Christianity, Constantinian Christianity, if that's what you want to call it. The Christianity that was there, in the birth of our nation. I don't think I agree that it wasn't a Christian nation. There's nothing in the Constitution that says that. I know that the Declaration of Independence talks about a creator, but anyway, we don't have to get into all that. But my, yeah, and yeah, it was totally, and it was distinct from other European nations and powers that tied those two things together. My question is that what in our context about voting and the political process, and we have such access to this, whereas people in other nations now or other time periods didn't have this kind of access. How do you think we live out our faith appropriately when it comes to things like we can vote, we can be a part, we can run for office, we can, we do have freedom of speech, we can, advocate against certain laws or whatever it is that we see are unjust, largely because we think they're unbiblical or ungodly, um, or at least a significant part. What do you think? What's the balance there between, yeah, this isn't a Christian nation, but how do we live out this faith in the public sphere?
Well, the first thing I'll say is go back to the point I mentioned earlier, and that is we live it out by living it out. How you vote, I mean, that's once every 2 years, maybe. And I used to kind of belittle voting, like just to kind of like if you feel called to vote, go ahead. And for several elections, I didn't vote. I've come to rethink that because it is an element of our say so. We get to have a say and influence things. I happen to live in a government where that asks my opinion about things, so I'm free to give it. So I don't belittle voting anymore. But it's so important then that we first realize that our call is to live this out, not to have the right opinion about what government should do. But the second thing is, um, I tell people you do have a say so. You could have a say in how things go, um, and hopefully, I have done a job throughout the year and throughout however long people are at the church of teaching kind of what the values of the kingdom are, what the priorities are. Like for example, we're called over and over again to care about the foreigner and the immigrant, the alien in our midst. Over and over again, that theme is there, and so that's our calling. Now, what I don't do is say, therefore, here's how you should vote. No, here's the value. But what I'm aware of, see, when we hear this, all the talk about welcoming the stranger, and Jesus says, go on the highways, byways, and invite people in, and don't just invite your friends to dinner, invite those who never get invited. He's not trying to give a national policy on immigration. He's saying, here's what my people are called to do this. And so how you translate a kingdom call to say, take care of the immigrant, does not necessitate a particular vote. I'm not smart enough to know just how porous or how tight our border should be. That's above my pay grade. Fortunately, being an expert on that stuff, it isn't required to be a kingdom person, because I do sacrifice for the foreigner in our midst, and we take care of. We just welcomed a bunch of people in from Afghanistan, and people in the congregation team up with these folks to help them get integrated in society. That's how you care about the immigrant from a kingdom perspective. Vote your conscience, but I'm not going to tell you what your conscience is, because the thing is, and this is what's so important, like, politics always has a degree of complexity to it. You bring all sorts of different considerations into how you vote for things and how you process that. It's a very complex thing to run a country, and so we've got to give grace to that. If you and I can together work to welcome in the immigrant, then I don't care if you have a very different view of what our border should be than I do. The important thing is that we're doing something together about this. So yeah, here are the principles that we should bring into the voting booth, because they're the same principles that we should be living out every day of our life.
Totally. I really love that. And I have a follow up. So I guess one thing that I'm wondering, like so we interviewed again, George, was it Weigel or Weigel? Do you remember?
Weigel.
Weigel. I want to make sure I get it right. And he has, and at the EPPC, the president right now is guy Ryan Anderson, who I followed a lot. He's an intellectual Catholic, and there's a strong Catholic involvement, as well as evangelical and Protestant, but Catholic involvement in politics and think tanks and bringing out like how we should affect policy. And so we need to live this out, which I agree, right? We need to live this out. So I guess I guess a follow up in this. So we have actions that we'll take to help. Again, the church shouldn't say this is what the immigration policy should be. We're going to take care of the immigrants that come here, whether or not they should be here or not, or refugees is what I meant, whether or not they should be here or not, or whatever. So I guess my question is, what do you feel is the place in terms of calling for, say, like the intellectual work of bringing a viable Christian apologetic and intellectual worldview into the marketplace of ideas, and having it be like into the place where, like, how aggressive, for lack of a better term, should we be in bringing our views for consideration in the public marketplace of ideas in our nation, given the freedom that we have?
Well, I would. There's nothing wrong with that, but I would encourage people to be very humble as you do this, because and aware of the ambiguity of these matters. Um, so you can say, here's what I think a Christian policy should look like, and but see, there's always going to be an element of it that's non-Christian, because you're talking about, here's how I think we should run the world.
Right.
And that already is a non-kingdom thing. It may be a good thing, it may be an admirable thing, but it's not a distinct kingdom thing. We're kingdom to the degree that we're bleeding for others. Having the right opinion doesn't count as being self-sacrificial to others, but it might be good ideas for all I know. But present it in a humble way, knowing that a different Christian who's just as smart and just as godly may have a completely different policy on this. It's a difficult matter to translate the callings of God's people into public policies. I mean, I don't expect Christians to act Christian, and I don't think it'd do any good to try to force them to be Christian. Hey, here's the Christian behavior you must engage in. You're no closer to the kingdom because you're acting a certain way if your heart is someplace else.
How should like non-believers view, politicians that profess, their own Christian faith, um, in the public sphere. And yeah, I mean, that there's a lot of there's a lot of examples I can use, but whether it's Trump saying that, he's a Christian, he loves the Bible, 2 Corinthians, but he doesn't need to be forgiven, or you've got and even like Biden, he's a Catholic, although I don't necessarily think that he like flexes that Catholic muscle in publicly very, very often. So like how should like the non-believer, you know, interpret, people of faith in the public sphere, specifically kind of in the political world?
Or by limited non-believers, how should any of us view that?
Mm.
And for my 2 cents, I would encourage folks to ignore it altogether. You see, the thing here's the trouble is that when you associate Christ with a particular political position, then all the people who hate that political position, you've now just given them reason to hate Christ. And there's a lot of people out there who are just disgusted. I know some of them just disgusted with evangelical Christianity because of its political alliances. All of their animosity towards Trump is now directed towards Christians. But there are folks on the other side too, where Christians have identified with the political left. And now all who loathe the political left now loathe those Christians. And it's putting an obstacle in the way of people coming to Christ. It's a tremendous obstacle. Because now we're known for that rather than for our self-sacrificial love. Martin Luther, the reformer, he said, I'd rather have a competent infidel as a ruler than an incompetent Christian. And so I totally agree with that. I think it's pretty clear now that claiming to believe in Christ does not necessarily entail anything at all about a person's character or about their policy. It's if anything, it's kind of one of the shibboleths you got to say to get a certain voting block. And I'm not saying that anyone who claims to be Christian in the White House or in the Senate or the Congress, that they're insincere. But that the reality is that everything that goes on in politics is done for political motives and has to be factored into it. So I would be inclined to say, don't pay any attention to that at all. But let them have their faith. But let's stick to talking about policies.
So it's something like you're looking at, you just need to worry about their competence. Like say it shouldn't matter if they're Muslim, if they're atheist, if they're Mormon, if they're Hindu, if they're, gay or straight, anything. It's just about their competence.
Well, and their character, I think, we now see that if the president or any politician lacks character, they can do a whole lot of damage. So I would take in, are they truthful? Are they decent? Are they upright? Are they respectful of others? Those things matter. But certainly, are they competent? And other than that, I don't know if they swear by the Constitution and uphold the Constitution, and we have reason to believe that, then what faith they have doesn't concern me. Or anything else.
Yeah, I think that's super challenging, and I really love that, the challenging aspect of that, because it really resonates with me. I've really been enjoying this conversation. I want to keep talking for another hour, but I know that we're kind of getting close to the time that we normally allot for this. And my question is about the influence of, say, like the influence again, and I'm trying not to ask the same question, but I guess what I'm getting at is the influence of Christians as salt and light, maybe, in our culture. And let me put it this way: so we have laws that reflect morals, some kind of moral idea. I guess when I hear someone say we can't legislate morality, what I hear them say is that you can't. What I think is being said is that you can't change someone's heart through a law. And I agree with that. You can't. But you can, I think, as you've alluded to, change someone's or incentivize or de-incentivize someone's behavior. Like murder being illegal is a moral. I think that's a moral. Like there's a moral judgment behind that. And I guess I'm going to murder because it's the extreme. If we were to take it down, like and feels like a fairly universal idea that we have, at least in the Western world, and I think I'm sure worldwide, that murder is the unlawful taking of a life is wrong. So what I'm thinking of is, like, let's say we get to something like same-sex marriage. Again, this has been a topic that's been deep on my heart for a long time. I've thought about it quite a bit, even more than abortion, kind of those two big hot button topics, and my own personal opinions have become more like less extreme is not the right word, but they become duller instead of as sharp and as damaging. Yes, see more ambiguity. That's a much better way to say it. So but let's take something like that and like the nature of marriage. And again, you can go to any other topic you'd want to address in it. We have a moral, we have a moral context behind that, just like there's a moral context behind any law. And I guess, what do you think? Like, how do you, like, we should love for sure, but how can we live this out? And I guess I could probably predict your answer, but I want to hear it again. How do we live this out in the political sphere, in our own lives, both of those things, where we have this opinion, we have this sense of what the morality is, and what kind of stand should we take? Maybe that's what I'm asking. Like, what kind of stand should we take? Like Bonhoeffer and Nazi Germany, right? I don't know. I'm not saying that we're there, we're not, but I'm saying, when is it that Christians should be like, I'm taking a stand, I'm getting explicitly political because this affects everything and it's so immoral. I feel like it's universally immoral or something like that. I don't know if that makes sense, the question, but
Well, okay, so just to start on this, it's important to, I mean, in a democracy, the whole thing's premised on maximal rights for the maximum number of people. Laws are supposed to be just what are necessary to hold the republic together. And in democratic republic, it's the people who determine these laws ultimately. That's how it's supposed to work in principle. And so we together vote on these kind of laws. The goal there isn't to have, for the Christian view to win. It's for the public to decide these things. And so the benchmark is what's decent and required. And so everyone agrees that murder is not, that's bad for the republic. And so we're going to outlaw that. And but now that it's very different than if you're talking about same-sex marriage. Someone could believe that is inherently destructive to American society, in which case they'd say, well, then we need to try to vote against it. And now they have to try to get the public on their side, so that becomes a law. But others of us don't think that is something that's inherently destructive. And so I personally, I would fight for the rights, because I want my rights protected under this law. And so I want everyone's rights to the degree that it is acceptable to the general decency of the general American population. I want them to have their rights. So, but that's something that Christians could disagree on. What we should not disagree on is, we're called, and we should be living in this question. We're called to love these folks and to be communicating that to these folks, and to be sacrificing for these
absolutely.
folks. And and so, what does that look like? What does that look like? And what makes this challenging, and Woodland Hills right now is we're in the middle of a 3-year discussion on this. We're we're processing this, trying to do an Acts 15 sort of what seems good to the Holy Spirit and us, because we're missionaries.
Right.
And as missionaries, we've got to be asking the question: how do we meet people where they're at to love them, and to where God wants them to be? And we're all in that process. And so, like, if you go over to some parts of Africa, still to this day, you come upon polygamous marriages. Well, you got to ask, what is the loving thing to do here? Do we just say, hey, no, you got to get rid of your other 4 wives, choose one? In which case, you're going to just blow apart the family, and you're going to now worry about the kids, and it's not loving. Any more than telling a person who's been divorced and remarried, oh no, you guys got to get divorced because Jesus says it's adultery to get remarried. So you got to ask, God always is throughout the Bible. He gives us his ideals, but then he says, okay, so when you don't keep these, here's what you do. There's an accommodation there. He's always accommodating to the fallenness where we're at, because he loves us where we're at in order to move us forward to where we can be. And so we should ask these questions as missionaries, but not only as missionaries. We should ask these questions. So usually when people debate ethical issues, they do it from a position of presumed superiority. And so we say, do we allow gay people to come into our church, as though we're more righteous? But see, when Jesus says, if you look at a person and you lust after them, you've already committed adultery. Well, that makes me an adulterer thousands of times over. So I'm not going to throw any stones at gay people. In fact, Jesus says, whatever you think you see in a neighbor's eye, that's a mere dust particle compared to the tree trunk coming out of your own eyes. And there must be a million dust particles in tree trunks. So consider your own sin to be a million times worse than that of the person in whose eyes you think you see a speck. And it makes a world of difference if, instead of presuming what we, the superior people, what should we do about these, people with these deal-breaking sins? Our sins are minimal, theirs are maximal. We ought to do the opposite. Our sins are maximal, theirs are minimal. And it makes a world of difference whether you ask these ethical questions from the bottom or from the top. And we should do it from the bottom.
Wow, that's really good.
Yeah, and I'm probably gonna butcher a summary of something a summary of something that you wrote in your book that we were talking about, Myth of a Christian Nation, where you mentioned something along the lines, I think murder, I think was the example you used, where you said that we can't necessarily legislate morality, and when we do, we almost sort of like change the incentive structure in the sense of, I'm not going to I'm not going to murder somebody because like my personal reasons for not wanting to murder somebody is because I don't want to go to jail or I don't want to face punishment. So basically I'm doing it for my own benefit. I'm not necessarily doing it for the benefit of the community or for the greater good. I'm doing it because I don't want to go to jail. So like did I adequately sort of like summarize that, and can you add on to that, because I thought it was a real powerful point that you made in the book.
Yeah, I could get at that question by just talking about Romans 12 and Romans 13. So in Romans 12, Paul says, never repay evil with evil, but always repay evil with good. If your enemy is hungry, give him something to eat. If your enemy is thirsty, give him something to drink. Because in doing that, you'll be heaping coals on their head, which was an idiom for saying you'll bring conviction on them. And that may bring a change. And he says, leave all vengeance to God. Vengeance is mine, says the Lord. Well, then, starting in 13:1, and remember in the original, there's no chapter divisions. This is one thought that's going on here. Paul tells us one of the ways that God exacts vengeance. And he uses the governments that wield the sword. And insofar as, and he's always working to minimize injustice and to maximize justice. And they have the power of the sword because in this fallen world, there's a lot of people who will only do the right thing if there's a threat, if they do otherwise. Christians shouldn't need a law to not murder somebody, but there's plenty of people who do. And so God, he's working everywhere to bring about maximal goodness. And so God will use these governments to exact vengeance on wrongdoers. God uses the government and the sword of the government to do what he just told Christians never to do. We leave all vengeance to God. There's plenty of people out there who are willing to wield the sword, and God will be working in them to do it in as just a way as possible, though I think God would wish the world would be free of all swords and free of all guns and all other killing units. But he deals with the world the way it is. And so, yeah, there's power over people can only control behavior. And it's always got to be the power of the sword. If you do this, boom, we cut your hand off. If you do this, we cut your head off. But that's our power is the power of the cross. Paul says it's the most audacious thing ever said. That while the world sees the cross as foolishness and weakness, to us it is the power and the wisdom of God. one of the reasons I know this is divinely inspired is because we know what it looks like for human beings to create gods. And they always are giant versions of ourselves, and they always are about having more power. We worship power because that's what we crave. Here Paul comes and says, well, no, actually, the power of God is most clearly revealed when God sets aside all of his divine prerogatives, becomes a human being, and then offers up his life for his enemies on the cross. That's the power of God, and that's the kind of power we're to trust. The kind of power we're supposed to lean on and demonstrate all of our life.
I love that. That's so insightful. And Greg, man, it's been such a pleasure to have you on the show. We have one last question. I like to ask this question. So we have a variety of people that that listen to the show, atheists and to Christians, liberal, left leaning to very conservative. Um, we've had guests that have been in all sorts of different religious ideas and atheists and again all sorts of different ideologies, to be honest with you. So my question is, what do you think is the most important thing that you would like to say to the people that listen about what you're passionate about, this myth of a Christian nation and this power under over power over? What's one thing that you would really want to say to them that you'd want them to hear you say?
Well, it is the all or nothing of the kingdom. I think, if Paul's telling the truth in 1 Corinthians 13, that you can have all the gifts in the world and all the smarts in the world and be as correct as anyone else in the world and all that, but if you don't have love, it's altogether worthless. That means our bullseye should always be cross-like love, self-sacrificial love, and yeah, that's what we aim at in everything we do. Because if we get that down, then everything else we need to get down will be gotten down. That's why Paul says, "Love fulfills the law." Live like this, and you fulfill the whole law. Get this done, and everything else you need to get done will get gotten done. But if we don't get this done, it doesn't matter what else you get done. It's of no kingdom value. And so it's absolutely the other thing I'd say, especially to non-believers out there, or maybe they have a different faith or whatever, but it's this. Uh, 2 weeks ago, I was talking to a non-believer, a friend of mine, and I'm just trying to slowly erode all of his assumptions about Christianity. Because if I thought Christianity was what he thought Christianity was, I'd been an unbeliever too. But at one point, he said to me, I'm not ready. I don't believe what you believe, but your version of the gospel is the first thing I ever wanted to believe. And I said to him, wow, well, that means that you're starting to understand the good news. If you're hearing the true good news, you may not believe it, but you would wish it to be true because it really is good. And if it's not something you wish it to be true, then you're not thinking about the true gospel. You're thinking about the left-wing gospel or the right-wing gospel, the politicized gospel, the butthead gospel, the storm the White House gospel. Who knows what gospel you're hearing? But it's not the good news gospel. The good news is that God is this kind of self-sacrificial love, and he calls us to manifest this kind of self-sacrificial love. And the best news in the world is that the promise is that that kind of love wins in the end. That's the only thing that's going to last. It may not look like it on Good Friday, but there will come an Easter morning when that love will be triumphant. That's what the resurrection is about. That love that was manifested on the cross towards us when we were still enemies, that will be victorious. I think the whole book of Revelation is about that, the victory of the cross. So trust in it, invest your life in it, and live it out.
That'll preach. That'll
preach. I think it just did. Hey, thanks for giving me my sermon for this weekend. I love it.
All right. Well,
so good.
The best honor is being plagiarized. So
exactly.
That's what I do all the time.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah. This topic right now, it couldn't be more relevant. We are heading into dark times, I suspect, here in America. Well, we already are in dark times, but this is the chance for the light to shine, if only we'll be willing to contrast and be different.
Yeah.
So let your light shine.
So good. Well, guys, thanks for joining us here, and thanks for listening and watching out there. This has been Greg Boyd. You can pick up his his books, right? Anywhere where books are sold, right, Greg? On Amazon and through the bookstores. And we encourage you to look them up.
Renew.org, REKNEW.org.
Renew.org.
You can get them there. We get a little money if you go to Amazon through us. We get a little kickback. So
there you go. That's good. Well, yeah, we want to make Greg rich, so make sure that you get but give him at least something.
It's about a dime a book.
So go check out his books. Go get his books, and this has been such an amazing conversation. I hope to have it again sometime soon.